Awesome. Welcome to AROYA Office Hours Live. A couple of reminders before we get started. This hour is your chance to hear from the experts, get answers in real time about data you're seeing with your grow, and share cultivation tips and tricks with other growers in this amazing industry. We thank everyone in advance for not using this time for things like airing policy or industry grievances or asking about AROYA, though you are always welcome to book a demo. My name is Mandy, and I'll be your moderator today. Feel free to type your questions in the chat at any time. If your question is selected, we'll have you unmute yourself and ask away. Anyone who asks their question live for the first time today will get an AROYA hat. This is limited to U.S. residents only and one hat per household. Plus, we're raffling off one of our limited edition AROYA t-shirts. To enter, everyone on today's live broadcast should post your email address in the chat. Seth and Jason, how are you today?
Good.
Pretty good, Mandy. How about yourself?
Oh, awesome. Still kind of like recuperating from the East Coast trip. I was like, it was just like on the go the entire time, but we met cultivators and we're going to have some amazing case studies to come out of all of that. So yeah.
Too fun. Great work.
Yeah.
I know I enjoy those case study trips, so I hope you did as well.
Oh my gosh, it was so fun. It was my first time to the East Coast and they're growing some really good stuff out there. So it was awesome. Are you guys doing anything fun for 7-10 for anything this Sunday?
I didn't have anything planned, just hang out with my family.
Yeah, probably get outside. It's really nice out right now.
It sounds amazing up there. You guys are always having the best weather. Well, cool. I guess without further ado, are you guys ready to go ahead and jump into our first question?
Sure. Let's get started.
Let's go for it.
Awesome. Yeah, we got a couple questions this week on Instagram, so we'll go ahead and get to those. Los Gringos wants to know, do mold sensors exist?
Yeah, I think there's some air quality sensors out there that can detect mold spores. And typically I think they're more expensive than we see most clients invest in. They just try to be proactive in preventing molds and mildews. That being said, if you can catch mold spores, then obviously you can help be proactive in reducing how much mold is going to grow even before it begins.
Yeah, I mean, the technology's out there, but we also know there's certain parameters we want to avoid for mold growth. So although those would be cool, we've also found there's not really an advantage to riding the line on if I might have mold when it comes to VPD. So the better end is to try to play it safe as far as VPD goes. And if you have the money to invest in a mold sensor, probably invest that more into dehumidification or HVAC equipment to get your environment more in line with the standards that we like to see.
Follow-up question. Does AROYA or Meter Group offer anything like that? Do we have anything that helps with mold?
Just use your VPD. And I mean, that's going to be the best thing that we have. So your Atmos 14, looking at climate parameters, always shoot for the representative VPD that you want. So pick a temperature that you want to be growing in and then get your humidity right so that you can hit those VPD targets.
Yeah. And just, I guess one of the biggest things that AROYA brings to the table is that 24/7 data logging. So you can see if you've had some sort of HVAC failure or a big need to adjust, let's say for, lights off, humidity swings, things like that. I know for me without data logging, that was really tough overnight. If all I did was leave a sensor that gave me a high and a low, and I didn't know when I needed to be changing my settings.
Yeah. And Seth nailed it there. Is take a look at your graphs, see when you do run into high humidity issues. It's very, very typical that we see it at lights off, like Seth was talking about. So there's good ways to combat that effectively. Think about starting your dehums maybe 30 minutes before your lights go off. And, rather than having a spike, you'll just have a dip and a bump, which is a much better type of environment than having something real high.
Yeah. And then, eventually once you've got data logging on your environment, you can start to see, okay, what is 100% capacity as far as plant matter goes for us in this room? Once we start going above a certain amount, okay, that's as much as we can shove in there without, having too high a humidity at any given point. Or, hey, for us, it's really important to run that 10-degree overnight differential. Or for some people, let's say if that's really where you want to be, you're really trying to get some purple out. Well, if your system can't handle it, you'd rather have not quite as purple a weed and not have to pick through mold if, not running that big of a diff was the difference. And that's where we can really help you fine tune it.
Awesome. Thank you guys for that. Los Gringos had a follow-up question. What's the biggest challenge switching from soil to cocoa?
I mean, you're going to run into a number of challenges. Obviously, when we're looking at some of the substrate differences, we like to look at cation exchange capacity. So how much synthetic nutrients are you applying to that substrate? Obviously, in cocoa, it's fairly inert. A lot of the cocoa we see, is about 1.0 EC just from the factory after we hydrate it up. In a soil, it's going to completely depend on the amendments and how far they have broken down into soluble nutrients. So that would be the first one. And then, thinking about the matrix potential differences. So with cocoa, obviously you've got different pith and chunk variations depending on manufacturer and which line you get from them. And that's actually a pretty small gradient on the different matrix potentials within cocoa. When we're looking at soil, clay, sand, those are all, I guess look up the soil chart there. There's a good triangle on the internet that talks about the different compositions in the corners and the blends of that. And so you can have a massive variation in matrix potentials. And how we've done some of the traditional agriculture stuff is we'll have people send in samples and we'll run dry down curves looking at water content versus matrix potential for different parts of their fields. There can be substantial differences. That's one of the wonderful things about cocoa and rock wool for that matter, is they're mostly predictable. So we don't necessarily need to be focused on those matrix potential curves, and we can be just using water content in that substrate.
Yeah. And, I honestly, Jason, you went pretty deep there, deeper as I was expecting for our audience. But one thing I do want to clarify, if you bought it in a bag at a store and you put it in a pot, it's not soil. It's a soilless mix. And if you actually look at most of those, they're going to be well over 50% cocoa coir or peat moss, generally speaking. Soil is made of mineral. There's mineral based, has horizons and organic layers, and takes time to develop. Typically in most, even outside of cannabis and horticulture situations, we're not having to deal with, sand, silt, and loam. We're not having to deal with, different particle sizes of soil. The CEC, the cation exchange capacity, is where it might come in differently because, as Jason said, you're in a traditional, let's say, living soil mix that a lot of people like to use. You're relying on these amendments to degrade over time and become plant available. So the biggest part of your switch is probably going to be getting used to mixing up that much fertilizer in your water, and probably just going oh man, I'm used to putting the money into the soil in the beginning, and now I'm watching myself dump it in every day.
Yeah. Good practice would be monitor your substrates every day in your environments. So the cocoa is going to be slightly more reactive than typical soils. So monitor those drybacks, monitor the performance of your EC.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Don't sweat it. It's not a big deal.
To measuring and keeping tabs on all of your substrates and everything. So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, guys.
Oh, no worries. Nature of digital connections, I guess.
Yeah, I know. Did you want to say something? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, I was just going to say that no one should worry about it. It's not that hard. I myself go back and forth between rock wool, cocoa, and soil out in my garden all the time, even using these sensors. And it's really nothing to be scared of. I think sometimes probably the worst thing for people trying something new is having too much information and getting stuck on the little details, going oh no, that line looks crazy. And sometimes it's best actually to review things after a few days. If you already know you're capable of growing a healthy plant, then yeah, take your readings and just don't worry about it. Do what you do. Follow some directions as far as, fertilizer mixing goes, and you'll be just fine.
Awesome. Thank you guys for that one. So yeah, we are going to move on to another question we got from a different Instagram user. Drunk Nomad 40 ounce wrote in to ask, and please let me know if this makes sense to you guys, but this is how it came in. 3-week stretch when flipping to flower. Does that make sense?
Cool. Your plant stretched for 3 weeks after you flip to flower?
That's a pretty standard place to start when figuring that out. But 3 weeks is just kind of a rule of thumb based on, a lot of things come in between 2.5 and 4 weeks. So what we like to do is say start at 3 weeks, but more importantly, start measuring your plant, through that first 3 weeks. And if you're still seeing appreciable stretch, then we're going to stay in generative a little bit longer till we've got that stretch finished. And then we can flip into bulking.
Yeah. So, one of the goals of applying generative irrigation, generative crop steering towards the beginning of flowers is to control how much stretch you're getting. So by documenting your plant heights going into flower and their plant heights throughout those first 3 to 5 weeks, you can have some predictability and manage the plant size a little bit better depending on their strain behavior.
Perfect. Thank you guys for that. We're getting some more questions rolling in. We're just going to keep going down our list. Space Dog Select wants to know, what do you do when you can't get accurate readings with the spot checker?
Try again. Make sure you're following the directions. So we provide a installation tool that specifies the right height so that we're not down below the water table and we can get accurate measurements. Sometimes we'll run into things like, if you've got a pocket in the substrate, if you've already used those installation holes before for a spot measurement, those can affect the readings. And then obviously making sure that sensor is flush in the substrate. Those are all just general practices that will help you get accurate readings each time.
Yeah. And, once you've checked off the list of everything Jason just mentioned, after that, also kind of look at your media type. When I get a box of cocoa blocks and I hydrate them, I can expect to see a few percent difference. And also, if I plug into one block and then plug into a different pot, I see a 6% difference and I pick it up and go, oh, I don't think it's that different. Chances are my perception's not going to be quite that accurate. So I tend to refer to the sensor and go, well, I know I trust my senses and stuff, but I also know the limitations of that. I know that I can't tell you a 1 degree difference when I see a sensor make that changing. I'm just not that sensitive. So extending that to, your growing practices and learning, number one, to trust the sensors, but also knowing how to troubleshoot them. So if you're, like I said, we're talking a small difference, you're just like, I don't think it's accurate. Well, it probably is. If we're talking a 20% difference and they both look and feel about the same, okay, start looking for possibly being inserted into a dry pocket. Or, a common thing is, say with rock wool, pushing them in kind of hard and those sensors will sponge back out. We'll have just a tiny, tiny bit of space between the sensor head and where it's actually going into the media. So even that little air gap will throw it off a little bit.
And, if anytime that you're using a media that you're not familiar with, you're switching brands, or you just need to validate for yourself what those water contents are doing, you can always use a standard block of that new substrate and weigh it, soak it out, weigh it again. And obviously 1 milliliter of water is going to weigh 1 gram. And then you'll get an idea of what the weight water content is and use your sensor as a reference to kind of calibrate yourself from that start. And one of the things that we always really try to reiterate is that the absolute specific water content that you're seeing at that point in time is not nearly as important as analyzing the dynamics of your drybacks and of your irrigation events in those plants.
Yeah, that's a really important thing to keep in mind, Jason. Number one, having those best practices. So we're always watching what our media is doing, batch to batch. Every time we hydrate, we want to check that baseline just to get an idea and know where we're at and not be surprised if we do have a little bit of variation. And then consistency across the board is the best you can do.
Awesome. Thank you guys for that. I just wanted to remind everyone who's joined us, don't be afraid to go ahead and post any questions you have about crop steering or cultivation in our chat. We'll go ahead and get to those. But we had some more questions roll in from Instagram. So our next question comes from Diwan Gawan. I definitely did not say that right, but they want to know, does stem through the clone cube create a callus on the wound and prevent infection? Let me know if you want me to say that again.
Yeah.
Okay. Does stem through the clone cube create a callus on the wound and prevent infection?
So typically when we're cloning, we don't want to stick that clone all the way through the cube. Sometimes what I'll do is stick it through slightly so I create an air hole at the bottom, then pull it back up in. But we do want the entirety of the cut to be in contact with our rooting media. That way we have water transfer directly into that xylem and we prevent having any kind of embolism in the plant.
Yeah. So obviously when we cut a clone, there's no roots and there's a very small ability for the plant to uptake any water at that point. And that's where you want that continuity between the stem and the clone block.
Yeah. And that's why, if we went back a long time in horticulture, perlite was super popular for cloning. The gap between the particles and the perlite's too big. We can't usually get quite good enough contact with the roots. So we do see higher success rates with rock wool, phenolic foam, and cocoa rooting cubes. But that's just because of that constant contact. And that's what we want. But on the flip side, you do want to make sure, if your rooting media is, let's say, sitting in puddles of water inside your trays, there are a few things we want to look out for to make sure it's properly aerated along with being hydrated. That way we avoid having, an anaerobic zone that we're just sticking this plant in trying to root. And, other things, cleanliness in the room. Make sure, if you've got you might see a little trichoderma, that's okay. A lot of people inoculate trichoderma, but if you're seeing actual mold, some little things to look out for is rooting gel. That can, grow different types of fungi and bacteria. There's all kinds of little things that want to grow on there. So just keep your rooting media clean, keep your room clean, and make sure you make nice, clean cuts. Sharp instruments go a long ways.
Sharp and clean instruments. As we've seen some of the hoplite and issues spread across the country and decimate people's crops every once in a while. It's the cleanliness of your cloning tools is the best thing you can do to prevent the spread of any of those diseases. So anytime that you're switching between moms, make sure that you're fully cleaning those tools. And if you've got multiple sets, then just leave some in some cleansing solution and rotate out so they can stay as productive as possible while you're cloning.
Yeah. And remember, using a lot of alcohol is very good. If you're going to use bleach, absolutely don't be scared of the bleach smell. Go well over 10, 20% when we're sanitizing tools. And then, one of the biggest things for that callus formation is just remembering that when you take clones, we're not cutting to a uniform height, we're cutting to a uniform node. Those nodes are actually what produce the auxin that'll allow us to root. So anything that you cut below that last node is more than likely just going to rot inside that root cube. The roots are going to pop out from where the node is and above it.
Awesome. Gosh, it's so much stuff to consider, but yeah, super important stuff. Great. We have another question from Diwan Gawan. Root in technique for clones into cubes and also cubes into slabs. Do you guys have any techniques for that?
Sure. Let's get started with talk about rooting in for clones. Consistency is one of the best things that you can do to help the predictability and projectability of your crop. And it starts when you're cutting those clones. So like Seth said, try and be very consistent on the node count that you're cutting from. If you can get started there then you're going to be ahead of time in the quality and the weight of your crop. It's going to make it way easier for your sales team to know when they're getting the right product. And one of the things that I like to do with the clone racks is take some weights for water content. Obviously, the Terrace 12 is a little bit too large to be using in a clone cube and those cloning type substrates. And so use your kitchen scale and try and get a weight water content of that and let them dry down. So most of the time, you're not going to want to be irrigating those plants every day. They're going to have a very low transpiration rate, and you're going to want to wait until that water content drops significantly before you rehydrate.
Yeah. And then, beyond that, you're going to want to very, very lightly hydrate and make sure you don't leave any standing water in those trays. I mean, it may be a slight extra expense, but the spacer inserts for your rock wool cubes are wonderful. They allow you to move the whole slab of cubes at once. And, really a big thing is patience when you're trying to get those clones to root. Make your cuts good, everything consistent, be patient on your watering, You're not going to wait too terribly long, but like Jason said, if you can start to establish a baseline, all right, we've lost X amount of volume in here, let's water. And usually you want to lose like, in the 15 to 20% range, at least on those clones. And then as far as rooting those clones into your 4-inch blocks or your Hugos or your cocoa pot, again, patience is key, but probably one of the best tools you can have to get yourself ahead here is a micro drip system. If you've got drip irrigation and you can put on very, very small applications, day 2, day 3, what we're doing is just giving that plant a little stimulation, a little fresh air and water into the root zone to keep it growing. Because one of the dangers of waiting there's overwatering and underwatering. Obviously, if we wait too long to water, we risk running, a pretty anaerobic root zone. We're not getting fresh oxygen in there. That's breeding ground for bacteria. If we overwater too early, we kind of come into the same problem after the block's saturated and we can't actually put fresh water in it. We've got to wait for the plant to transpire. So with that drip system, just being able to put on, 1 to 3, 1% shots throughout the day until you start to achieve, a 15% total dryback is the best way to go.
Yeah. And if we just think about the biology of those roots, they are seeking out water and they're seeking out typically a little bit lower nutrient content. And so when we have those 1% or small irrigations for the first 5 to 7 days after a transplant, it's encouraging those roots to be active, not to get stagnant up in the top block with a high water content, and really seek out the entire media. We want those roots to be taking advantage of all the substrate that's being used.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So we did have a question come in through the chats just now. Michael, did you want to take yourself off mute and go ahead and ask the guys?
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you guys if you could break down, now that we're past bro science in the industry and into actual science, there's a lot of things that, we used to do over assumptions and just trial and error that link to what we're currently doing. Could you guys break down some differences and expound on some of the things that are still in action, like, say, stress droughting becoming what's currently generative steering?
Yeah. Obviously stress drought, as far as hydroponic medias go, is not a very common thing. Unless you're hitting 0% water content, maybe 5-10% in cocoa, there's available water to those plants. And so I think, probably one of the most ironic correlations between the good old hand watering is we could only hand water once a day, typically, and a facility was very large. And by nature, that's going to be a more generative type of steering. So, even accidentally, we were controlling plant growth just due to the limitations of irrigation in some of the more legacy grows.
And, coming into more standardized horticulture and science, just defining that, we used to say like, we're really drought stressing that plant. Well, actually we're not. We're not trying to take it to the point where we're putting drought stress on it, i.e. getting close to a wilting point. We're just stretching out that irrigation time. So that would be like a great example of something that, people were doing. And now we've just kind of nailed down, like, what is that? Why does it work? If we actually do go for a full drought stress, which would be, something similar to what we'd see in like dryland farming, we're not getting anywhere near those numbers. We don't want to. That's totally counterintuitive. If we were looking at actual drought stressing, we'd be like, okay, how little can we water this thing and have it still survive? And what we're looking for is, the most growth we can possibly get. So, little differences like that. There's other things that super cropping is a big one. I think that's pretty fun to do at home. But in a commercial setting, the advantages that it brings up don't usually outweigh how much it costs to go super crop a 5,000 square foot room, especially if you're in a double tier situation.
The labor involved with that is insane.
Exactly. So it's like, everything is relative now when you're scaling up. All that love we like to give our plants, we kind of throw some of that out just because we have too many plants to do that too.
Yeah, and thinking about labor input, one of the things that people used to do quite a bit was training their plants, building out as much colas as they could by training them tying the limbs down, etc., using some of those old training devices. There's lots of stuff on the market to help people do that. And nowadays, fortunately, the genetic selection is so massive that we can usually choose a plant that performs how we like, just due to its DNA.
Yep. And, as growers, everyone right now has the opportunity to help, influence where breeding is going. Breeders are trying to put out what growers want. And as growers want more, I want to say commercially viable, but easy to grow strains, or strains that have certain attributes in terms of, physical structure or watering requirements, we're going to see that more and more being popular. And that's everyone's goal, right? Every breeder wants to make a plant that's really awesome to smoke, beautiful, and easy to grow. And, I'll say it again, we're 80 to 100 years behind a lot of other plant breeding projects in terms of just how much freedom they've had to operate. We're barely dipping into what we're going to be seeing in the next 10 to 20 years in terms of cannabis genetics and what's available out there.
That's really exciting. Michael, did that answer your question, or do you have a follow-up?
No, absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Mike. Always good to hear from you.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks. You. Good to see you again. We do have another question from Instagram. Duan Guan wrote in another question. Is it okay to adjust feed to combat high or low EC in medium, or will lack of fresh newts affect your yield?
So my favorite way to modulate irrigation to control EC is just by your runoff percentage. For trying to push that EC down a little bit lower, maintain it, we can have more runoff. If we want that EC to continue to rise, then we can just reduce our runoff. And so I guess that would be modulating your irrigation duration of each event typically. Obviously, you could run maybe one or two more P2 events if you were running bulking and trying to get a little bit more runoff or keep that EC low. As far as getting too far, I don't think you need to modify your schedule significantly unless it's just way off from what it should be anyways.
Yeah, I think the thing to look at there is no matter what, that runoff is going to be modulating our EC in the root zone. So when we adjust feed EC, we have another variable we have to adjust, which is how much runoff we're going to run to get our desired EC. So it's a lot easier to play with one variable to get the effect we want than to play with two. And then we don't, if you want a good reason to run 3.0 instead of 4.0, it's 75% as much fertilizer that you're going to spend in a run. There are a lot of these things we can modulate, not just saying, okay, what's best for the plant, but we can now look at okay, how can we make this more affordable? How can we be more efficient with our fertilizer and water usage? The end goal is, at least for me in using technology like this, is to really dial in what certain plants need and try to make it as efficient as possible to grow them.
Yeah. One of the things that's made this quite a bit easier as well is just the quality of nutrients that are available in the market today. They have a pretty decent balanced composition if you're going with some of the popular name brands that are out there. It's going to be more consistent than, say, mixing your own, unless you're very well educated in nutrient composition and its effects on the plants. And that really helps us from having to over irrigate just to balance out the nutrient composition in the substrate. So if we're feeding what the plant is eating, then we know that the balance of nutrients in there is going to stay fairly consistent. That's why we like to watch runoff pHs, just to ensure that that is actually happening. And so what that means is we could run, say, a 3.0 in our feed irrigation instead of 4.0 and allow the nutrients to actually build up in the substrate and just take advantage of that rather than disposing them as waste or runoff.
Awesome. Thank you guys for that answer. So that is actually the last Instagram question that we had for today. Jay's writing in. Jay, did you want to take yourself off mute and go ahead and talk to the guys? Oh, he said he wants to thank you for all the info that we give him. Aw. I'm like, aw. That's directed at you guys. So thanks.
You're welcome. We have a lot of fun doing this. we learn about what information is most helpful for clients. Obviously, we built up a pretty good library in our YouTube, just talking about the most popular topics that people are looking to get answered.
Yeah, it's a blast to do every week. Honestly, you guys make it enjoyable. That's for sure.
Yeah, for real. It's fun. And I get to learn so much just even being a part of this. So yeah, thank you guys. Without any other questions, I guess we're going to go ahead and wrap up today's show. Do you guys want to talk about anything else while we're on the air? Any new developments or anything cool going on? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, it's great. We can talk a little bit about some of the projects that we've been trying to finalize. So one of those would be our generic harvest flow. All the people that are on our metric integration are used to using our RFID scanners and our scales for an effective, efficient, and accurate harvest process. And so our generic flow is going to open that up for states that we haven't integrated with metric yet, or states that aren't metric integrated. And really, that's just the last piece in the puzzle of your harvest groups. So obviously tracking all the input information and then starting to get an easy way to track the weights, the yields of those plants with our scale is going to be an exciting thing.
Yeah. Just giving people who still, like Jason said, aren't integrated with metric or in a metric state, the opportunity to use what, we're kind of referring to as a touchless harvest system. No more sticky fingerprints on a clipboard with a spreadsheet on it. Now you can just scan it, hang it, move along.
Yeah. And it's the hardware itself is very similar to some of the other systems out there in the industry that have been doing this for a while. Obviously the thing that's nice about this is it's getting everything into one system now. So rather than having your compliance system and your harvesting system and your data systems, we're hoping that it makes life easier just by having AROYA and having the visibility without translating mentally across all those different programs.
Mm-hmm. And then it also takes the responsibility off of your shoulders for entering all of your yield data in for harvest analytics. Then it's just already in the software. There's no opportunity for you to miss entering a weight and not have some analytic that you want. Now it's just all in there and it's tracked back to the tag.
Yeah. I think some of my favorite features of our scale that we've built up during the development process is the fact that you can use multiple scales, multiple computers. You can have, if you're trying to get down 1,800 plants in a day, that's a lot of work. And we want to, see that work get spread across 3, 4, however many people that you can have recording this at once.
Yeah, that's been a big game changer for some of our clients that are able to utilize that.
Heck yeah. It's always great to simplify and make things more efficient. Michael, he said, get into that Aqua Lab. You guys want to say anything about that? Sure.
Yeah. I actually meant when we were talking about mold sensors earlier, I was thinking about the Aqua Lab. Obviously not a sensor during cultivation that's going to be great for detecting mold, but shooting for the water activity and the time frame that you need to prevent any of that growth. The Aqua Lab is a great way to document your process and ensure that you have the highest weight, the highest quality product that you're shooting for during the drying process. And another thing that's nice is you can just pre-validate your test samples that are going to go out to the lab. So rather than, waiting with your fingers crossed, hoping that your snap test didn't lose too much weight or you didn't get to a safely dry point with that product, run through your Aqua Labs, obviously do multiple samples, document that in your systems and get an idea of what the best water activity for that strain is. There are some different arguments as far as what the ideal water activity is. Obviously, if I'm rolling up some joints, I like to have it a little bit lower than something fresh and sticky for a bowl, just to ease of work with that product. And I think what we recommend was like 0.6 is what we're shooting for,
in
just
the
as a general
0.5 to 0.6 range.
Yeah.
So product application matters. The other thing it really allows you to do is stop, like you say, guessing and losing grams to the air. We can really maximize how much weight we're putting out. And then also by following that product, all the way into the packaging stage, you can double check and make sure. I mean, when we talk about like the whole white ash argument, sometimes that a lot of that has to do with just inconsistency. One batch is going out way too fresh, and the one behind it went out bone dry. And that bone dry one's going to burn probably very white every time. So nailing that consistent point and ensuring that you have that quality is a huge part of it. I mean, we'll always go back and say we're at a time right now in most places where cannabis is legal, at least, especially if it has been for a year or so. When you walk in the store, you have a lot of choices. And there's, buyers that buy the same brand all the time. Then there's people like me that, I have a few favorites that I like to buy, but a lot of times I'll try something new when I go in because their inventory is also changing. People are growing new strains all the time. The one thing I know as a consumer that's true for me and true for plenty of people I know is a negative experience with a brand is a lot longer lasting in my mind than a positive one, because most of the time it's a positive experience. So just ensuring that your customers don't run into that is huge, I think.
And as a good practice, it's the same reason that we recommend people use a number of substrate sensors in their grow room, and that is to analyze the consistency, the uniformity of the room at one point in time. Based on where your fans are at, where your dehumidifiers are at, where other environmental modulation factors are going on in a dry room, go across there and spatially think about where you're taking those samples, and then try to get an idea of, hey, is this due to the product that came in? Is it due just to different strains and how they perform in a dry room? Or is this an actual application where the room itself was ending up in a lack of uniformity throughout that product? And sometimes you can go in there and make some easy modifications to how that room performs to make your life easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it can help you make those judgment calls. I was thinking about, sometimes I've encountered where we're pulling down the dry room and you find, a few racks that are just packed so densely that they're way behind the rest of the room. And you're like, okay, what happened here? Well, we can start attaching acceptable numbers to everything. It makes it a lot easier to audit that and stay ahead of it, rather than go, okay, now we've got a whole other logistical issue to think about right now. Whereas a couple of days ago, someone pulling samples might have been able to easily spot this and just fix it then.
Awesome discussion, you guys. Michael, did that touch on your question? I know you wanted to talk about ideal moisture and water activity levels. I didn't know if that was exactly what you were asking. Okay, he says that got to it. Yeah, that was great, you guys. Thank you. Well, cool. If there's no other new stuff in the works or anything that we want to talk about, we can go ahead and wrap up. What do you guys say?
Sounds good to me.
It's a good day.
Yeah.
Cool. We can start the weekend early. Well, awesome. Well, thank everyone for joining us. And Seth and Jason, thank you guys for another great conversation. Michael, please stick around for a minute so we can collect your contact info and send you an AROYA hat if we haven't done so already. So yeah, thanks everyone again for joining us for AROYA Office Hours Live. Got questions about AROYA and how it can be used to improve your cultivation production process, or any other topic you'd like to have covered in future office hours sessions, post it in the chat. You can shoot us an email at support.aroya@metergroup.com or send us an Instagram DM. We would love to hear from you. We record every session and we'll be emailing everyone in attendance a link from the video from today's discussion. It'll also live on the AROYA YouTube channel. Like and subscribe while you're there. And if you find these conversations helpful, please feel free to share with your network and spread the word. We'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mandy.
And thanks, dudes.
Thanks, Mandy.